Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
A long line formed early tonight outside one synagogue in Washington, D.C. In Boston, over 1,000 people packed into a service. And in Boca Raton, Florida, over 2,000 jammed into a synagogue. Right here in New York, a group of Muslim women holding white roses greeted worshipers and visitors outside one synagogue. I want to bring in now Mark Hetfield. He is the president and CEO of HIAS, which was founded as a Hebrew immigrant aid society and now helps rescue refugees around the world. HIAS was targeted in the hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric of the alleged Pittsburgh gunman. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
You know, it's been a week since the massacre in Pittsburgh, and you haven't heard anything from the president or Jared Kushner or Ivanka Kushner. I mean, that's extra surprising considering the personal connection Jared has to your organization. Tell us about that relationship.
Sure. No, we are disappointed. The HIAS works in partnership with the United States government and specifically with the State Department to resettle refugees to this country. And we have received a lot of words of support from many elected officials, but many others, but not a word from the White House, nor has any political appointee at the State Department contacted us, and certainly Jared and Ivanka have not either, even though Jared Kushner, frankly, wouldn't be here were it not for HIAS. We rescued his grandparents and brought them to this country.
Yeah, Mark, HIAS became the focus, really, of Robert Bauer's rage because you help immigrants from all over the world, and he wrote on social media that HIAS likes to bring invaders in and kill our people. Where do you think that kind of hate comes from?
Well, I think it comes from fear originally. And the problem is that if you don't deal with fear, fear deteriorates into hate speech, and then hate speech deteriorates into hateful acts. And what we have now in this country, instead of having leaders that address fears and tell us that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, to tell us that our fears are not rational, instead, they stoke them, and they lie, and they mischaracterize and vilify refugees, people who are fleeing terror, and say that they're bringing terror, but they're not.
Mark, can I ask you something? And forgive me if you think it's inappropriate, but I mean it. With all the best intentions. What has this done to Jews, especially in America? Has it, in an odd way? Is there more solidarity, or is it just a sense of overwhelming grief and loss? Like, talk to me about that.
That's one of the few good things that have come out of this horrible terrorist act, and that is that we have gotten so much support from Jews and from others. And frankly, we were getting a lot of support from Jews before that. Because, there was one thing this terrorist was right about, is that American Jews were welcoming refugees. We had celebrated the first ever refugee Shabbat. And this was to show solidarity and love for refugees, because American Jews realized that there would not be an American Jewish community but for those times when America opened its doors to refugees, including to Jared Kushner's grandparents.
It is Monday, the 5th of November of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right, folks. It's been another one of those weekends, and weekend leading right up to tomorrow, where most everybody who hasn't voted will vote. If you intend to vote, and you better be intending to vote. And I suspect anybody listening to this show has voted or is getting ready to vote, if that's the only way you can vote. And so do it. And no excuses. We have the power right in our hands, even though they've gamed the system. Yeah. You know the reason they call it a blue wave. Yep. Irrevocable tides wearing away rock over time. And now time is up. So, wow. Hey, NBC ran that racist Trump ad during the football game last night. Thanks a lot, NBC. CNN wouldn't run it because it's too racist. And Brian Kemp, he got caught having, a data system in his electoral computer network that could be hacked. And so he blamed it on the Democrats. Right. He called in the FBI. Is he that stupid? I mean, the FBI is not going to say, oh, well, you filed a false police report, we'll just let you go. I think that he might have opened up a can of worms. And he should be in jail for, all of the abuses of power that he's already endeavored in. Yeah, he's a little bit quiet about it now. Usually these people double down, though he did issue a proclamation about it. And I don't know. Seems like a conflict of interest to me, but I'm old school. What's on the rest of the menu today here? And the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, at the top, that was the head and CEO of the Hebrew Aid International Society, HIAS. The group that was blamed for by the Pittsburgh shooter for, got to kill all Jews because they're bringing in Jews and other people, refugees, And Trump, of course, has doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on that meme, in spite of the fact that 11 elderly Jews were slaughtered in synagogue while praying. So much for religious freedom. Well, Jared Kushner's grandparents would have never made it here if it hadn't been for HIAS. And we already know Stephen Miller's family, who absolutely disowned Stephen Miller. They cite HIAS as well as being instrumental in saving their families. But for whatever reason, I got to tell you, HIAS is now up there with, the Muslim Brotherhood. You don't get a pogrom, without, a little bit of anti-Semitism now, don't you? Jeez. Militias, right-wing white nationalist militias are hightailing it to the southern border, hoping to kill some brown people. But my suspicions are that these types already steal. They're down there stealing National Guard equipment. Once they start doing it to the standing army, they might get some blowback. In fact, I'm actually an advocate. I want our military to fight these right-wing white nationalist militias down along the southern border, so we don't have to fight them here. Now, isn't it better? What else is on the rest of the menu here? In West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Bistro Cafe, well, the Missouri Republican Attorney General yeah, I'm looking at you, Josh Hawley, let his Senate campaign consultants direct his state office. The campaign folk pushed policies that the Attorney General would normally introduce themselves. But he let, campaign staff, lobbyists, write policy. It's almost like legislation in a box, almost. Neil Gorsuch's attack on immigrant communities slams hard into a wall. And in a probe that has prompted fresh calls to pause Britain's EU departure, British police are investigating Brexit campaigners who received millions in illicit Russian funding in 2016. Wow. I wonder if they'll share their information with what they know about here, maybe. We can only hope. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where Trump is turning the border into a playground for violent extremists and endangering our troops. And Trump's Freudian slip revealed the truth about the Russia-based influence campaign that got him into office. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com. You'll notice some links in which you can determine if you are registered to vote and to register to vote. California, for instance, has same-day registration, and there are many states that you can register even today or tomorrow. So check out to make sure that you're registered, and do register, and do vote, and get other people to vote too. Take a gander all the way down to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page is the contribute button. And thank you for becoming, and would you please become a Patreon of Netroots Radio. Your contribution helps us pay the bills so we can keep resisting, as well, our mandate and mission statement specifies. So thank you for your generosity. And you can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform. Thanks, Tom. Follow us on Facebook, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary about 10 minutes before showtime, and that is posted at Daily Kos, so check that out. Those show notes and links are an integral part to this multimedia operation, indeed. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. We're on Facebook and other social media platforms. And pick up podcasts of the show by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. Okay. Had a little bit of a back problem over the weekend. I hate getting old. It is such a chore. Okay, our first article here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is an article out of Think Progress by Ian Millhiser. Missouri Attorney General and Republican U.S. candidate Josh Hawley allowed out-of-state political consultants to give direct guidance and tasks to his taxpayer-funded staff, according to a report by the Kansas City Star. Among other things, the Star reports that Hawley's political consultants helped oversee the Attorney General Office's rollout of Missouri's lawsuit against opioid manufacturers, which Hawley announced in June of 2017, and a state effort to target human traffickers, an initiative Hawley unveiled in April of 2017. Well, if you're going to fashion legislation so that it advances your political career, don't you want campaign consultants, the experts, to do it for you? If you're a dimwit, can't do it yourself. He's Attorney General. Okay, ironically, given the wall-to-wall coverage of Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton's IT practices in 2016, Hawley and his staff also reportedly used private email accounts to discuss official business. Well, that's the only reason they blamed Hillary for it, because they'd been doing it, and you always blame your opponent for that which you are doing. Hawley, for his part, denies the allegations against him, claiming that, quote, no one ran the Attorney General's office but me. But Hawley also has a record of flamboyantly lying to his state's voters. I wonder what he does to his wives or girlfriends. In an ad released last September, Hawley deceived voters by claiming that he supports forcing insurance companies to cover all pre-existing conditions. Of course, he's lying. We know Hawley is lying because, as Attorney General, Hawley signed onto a lawsuit seeking to repeal Obamacare in its entirety. Now they're saying, well, no, we didn't mean that. We just meant that the black guy did it. We can't stand that. If you just gone back to calling it Romney Care, we would have been okay. In fact, why don't we call it Romney Care now? He's back in the picture. Again, Ian Millhiser brings us this offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. And, of course, the great Ian Millhiser writes for Think Progress. Well, Neil Gorsuch, looks like his ideas are running up against a wall. We'll see how long that wall stands up to it, though. The Supreme Court announced on Friday, for the second time in 2 weeks, that it will not halt a trial challenging the Trump administration's efforts to discourage immigrants from participating in the 2020 census. Also, for the second time in 2 weeks, Neil Gorsuch tried and failed to come to the Trump administration's rescue. The case is in Department of Commerce. The case arises out of the Trump administration's decision to ask census respondents whether they are citizens, a question that the census has not asked as part of its decennial count since the Jim Crow era. Oh, you mean the good old days. Multiple experts, including top officials who led the census in the Reagan and Bush 1 administrations, warned that asking a citizenship question could seriously jeopardize the accuracy of the census. Feature, not a bug. Because people who are undocumented immigrants may either avoid the census altogether or deliberately misreport themselves as legal residents. Well, the Constitution mandates an actual enumeration of the whole number of persons in each state, regardless of immigration status. So, a citizenship question potentially violates the Constitution because it could discourage millions of immigrants from participating in the census. Well, they're going to bring original intent to bear on this argument. Original intent so original, you'll think it was made up, because it was. That's how original it is. One central issue in this case is whether the Trump administration acted with an improper motive when it decided to add this question. Really now? Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross initially claimed that the question was added because the Justice Department requested it to aid its enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, but there is considerable evidence that this claim is a pretext and that Ross only sought the Justice Department's view to paper over a more insidious motivation. Indeed, a federal judge initially held that lawyers challenging the citizenship question could depose Ross, though the Supreme Court halted this specific deposition late last month. When the court halted the Ross deposition, however, Gorsuch handed down an opinion announcing that he would go much further. Gorsuch, in an opinion joined only by Clarence Thomas, said that he would have halted all extra record discovery pending our review. And he strongly hinted that he thinks that the citizenship question is constitutional. Well, of course he does. He's a Federalist Society judge. After Gorsuch failed to get the votes he needed to halt this trial altogether, the trial court announced its intention to move forward, including with a deposition of a senior Justice Department official, and the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court again to halt the entire proceeding. The court rejected the second request on Friday, this time over the explicit dissents of Thomas, Gorsuch, and Samuel Alito. Wow. Friday's order is no guarantee that the citizenship question will be struck down, though. The Supreme Court's majority remains hostile to voting rights, and the citizenship question is very much a voting rights issue because the census will determine the allocation of seats in the House of Representatives. Should the Trump administration ultimately prevail, power will shift from immigrant communities towards whiter, more conservative communities because the white minority has to rule. God ordained it. But the fact that a majority of the court will allow this trial to proceed is still significant. Many voting rights cases turn on whether a government official who pushed a charge or a change to election policies acted with invidious intent. A gerrymander will fall, for example, if plaintiffs can show that the district lines were drawn intentionally to weaken voters of color and empower white voters. Similarly, a voter ID law might be struck down if the plaintiffs can prove it was enacted with racist intent. But according to Roberts, there is no racism in America anymore. Yeah. Well, Friday's order suggests that at the very least, 5 members of the Supreme Court are not willing to go quite that far. That's not necessarily great news for the future of voting rights. But it's much better than the alternative for Americans committed to free and fair elections. Of the EU Observer brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. British police are investigating reasonable suspicion that Brexit campaigners received millions in illicit funding in 2016. The probe has prompted fresh calls to pause Britain's EU departure. It also prompted denials that Russia might have had a hand in steering British public opinion. The suspected electoral law offenses were appropriate grounds for serious fraud specialists from the National Crime Agency, NCA, to go into action. And the NCA said that on Thursday, on the 1st of November. It went ahead after the Electoral Commission, a British regulator, said its own 1-year-long investigation had given reasonable grounds to suspect that a British businessman had illegally bankrolled the Brexit side. Aaron Banks, a 52-year-old insurance tycoon, had only contributed about 9 million euros, and that would be 8 million pounds, to pro-Brexit groups, of which 2.9 million pounds was used directly in the campaign. But its scrutiny of bank transfers showed that he was not the true source of the funds, which instead came from a shareholder loan to his firm, Rock Services, from an unknown third party. Unknown third party? You mean the type that writes contracts in Cyrillic? that kind of third party? Well, let us find out. Mr. Banks and Ms. Blaney knowingly concealed the true circumstances under which this money was provided, an Electoral Commission lawyer, Bob Posner, said, referring to Elizabeth Blaney, one of Banks' associates. The sums of money involved in these matters are significant, the Electoral Commission added, after the pro-Brexit side won the referendum by a narrow margin of 51.9 to 48.1%. Now, the revelations prompted some opposition MPs to pause Brexit pending the NCA action. It must be put on hold until we know the extent of these crimes against our democracy, David Lammy from the opposition Labour Party said. Philip Lee, a pro-EU MP from the ruling Conservative Party, added, "It is not okay to proceed with Brexit while such big questions about such serious allegations remain unanswered." But the British government ruled out such moves. The referendum was the largest democratic exercise in this country's history, and the Prime Minister is getting on with delivering his result. And, of course, that was Theresa May. The government had so far not seen successful interference in UK democratic processes, her spokeswoman said. Now, the Electoral Commission report on Banks and Blaney did not mention Russia, but the case comes amid accusations that Russia interfered in the Brexit the same way it later interfered in the U.S. election, and in the French election, and in the German elections, etc., etc., etc. It also comes after MPs grilled Banks over his links to Russian investors and meetings with Russian diplomats. For her part, Blaney rejected the idea that Moscow was behind the dubious shareholder loan. No, it came through Deutsche Bank. Yeah, I bet. Now, that was in this reporter's embellished opinion. Okay. I can confirm it wouldn't have come from Russia. I run the group of companies where the money was from, and we don't have any transactions that are from Russia, she told British broadcaster the BBC on Thursday. Banks also denied the ludicrous allegations leveled against me, adding, "I am a UK taxpayer and I have never received any foreign donations." Oh, because they came through a bank that laundered the money first. Okay, we'll see about that. The Electoral Commission had acted under intense political pressure from anti-Brexit supporters, he said. "Crikey, it's not like I ordered the murder of someone inconvenient," he joked on social media. I guess that means he has then. Wow. The bank affair comes at a sensitive time in British EU negotiations. Talks remain locked on issues such as the Irish border and the future of the City of London amid speculation that the EU might call an extraordinary summit in November ahead of Britain's exit in March. British newspapers, the Financial Times and the Times, reported separately that the EU had proposed a new solution on Ireland and on the city, loosening single market rules on customs and financial trading. That saw the British pound jump in value amid market jitters on the implications of a no-deal British EU exit. But Downing Street and the EU negotiator, French politician Michel Barnier, later denied that new proposals were afoot. The British Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, also admitted to MPs in Parliament on Thursday that he was drawing up plans to get home British people if they were stranded in Europe, in case that a no-deal Brexit led to cancelled flights. Well, that's planning ahead. Okay, let's go to our break. And when we come back, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, still scary after 40 years. After several forgettable and downright terrible sequels of John Carpenter's campy, low-budget 1978 horror classic Halloween, the franchise has finally hit gold again with director David Gordon Green's fresh interpretation with the original title. Picking up 40 years after the debut, the audience learns what has since happened to both killer Michael Myers and his most memorable would-be victim, Laurie Strode, played once again by the iconic Jamie Lee Curtis. The years have not been kind to the latter, and to the credit of the screenwriters, this is one of the few times that a slasher film has ever acknowledged the long-term stress and psychological damage of being a survivor of such violence. In Laurie's case, her obsession with trying to stop Michael by any means necessary has taken its toll on her relationships with her daughter Karen and her now teenage granddaughter Allison. However, Laurie's problems go well beyond her estrangement from her family when Michael escapes while being transferred to a new psychiatric facility and decides to return to his old stomping grounds of Haddonfield, Illinois. His rampage through the neighborhood of not-so-smart teenagers provides some much-needed thrills and chills, but the heart of the movie isn't so much the graphic violence, but rather how survivors and would-be victims fight back when the odds are against them. It's especially noteworthy that in the end, it's 3 generations of women who attempt to take down the crazed killer, who seemingly will stop at nothing, and at times seems downright unstoppable. Without spoilers, this Halloween delivers what a well-financed 2018 horror movie should. Plenty of scary with a healthy dose of girl power, which is refreshing without being forced. This is truly a Halloween in the era of Me Too. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Steve Mirsky.
I think, though, if genome sequencing just gets super cheap, then it's probably very soon going to make sense to just sequence all your DNA.
Science journalist Carl Zimmer, author of the book She Has Her Mother's Laugh, The Powers, Perversions, and Potential of Heredity. Zimmer spoke last month at New York University's Journalism Institute. Right now, commercial genome services only look at a small percentage of all your DNA, but as the cost plummets, you'll get your entire genome.
Then the issue will become, well, what do you use your genome for in terms of your health? A lot of people will actually benefit from something I learned by looking at my genome, which is that if, God forbid, I were to get hepatitis, there are certain drugs that won't do me any good because I have certain genes. Pharmacogenomics, as it's called. I think that pharmacogenomics might be the kind of the low-hanging fruit of genome sequencing, because like doctors so often, like if you get sick, they're like, well, let's try this, and it might be hepatitis, it might be depression, all sorts of things. Like, well, that didn't work very well. Let's try this. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just skip the stuff that doesn't work and go to the stuff that does? So that might be kind of where medicine goes in terms of using our genomes and understanding how heredity affects our health.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Steve Mirsky.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
Is anti-Semitism in America on the rise?
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
That is how our Civil Liberties Minute from June 2018 began. And now, following the murders at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, we're going to replay the rest of it. Comparing 2017 to 2016 shows, according to the Anti-Defamation League, a nationwide increase of anti-Semitic incidents of 57%. That's the largest percentage increase in a year since ADL began keeping records. The 2017 data show a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents in schools and on college campuses. 2017 was the first year since 2010 when there was a recorded anti-Semitic incident in every one of the 50 states. And comparing 2017 to 2015 shows that the number of incidents of anti-Semitism in America has doubled. This spiking in anti-Semitism, as summarized in a recent New York Times article, is attributable to the effects of social media and the emboldening of extremists, all exacerbated by the divisive state of American politics.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Monday, November 5th, 2018. I'm Mark Boulanger. There are about 67 million domestic workers in the world. Most, about 80%, are women. For some countries, such as the Philippines, domestic workers who migrate out of the country for work are a major source of national income. There are about 4 million Filipino workers in the United States. Saudi Arabia has more than 1 million. In Australia, there are more than 200,000. To better understand the conditions of Filipino domestic workers, Alain Rodriguez interviewed one of the Philippines' top labor leaders. Mr. Rodriguez is a communication officer with the Trade Union Development Cooperation Network. He talked to Julius Canglet, the vice president of the Federation of Free Workers of the Philippines. Here is Mr. Rodriguez with his first question to Mr. Canglet from the Philippines.
In the Philippines, there are over 2 million people who are employed as domestic workers, and the country is one of the world's top 4 sending countries of domestic migrants. How come this sector is so important in the Philippines, and who are these workers?
Well, most of the domestic workers that we had come from poor families in the provinces, those who do not have direct access to higher paying jobs, and to a certain extent the relatives from poor provinces of families that are already based in the cities. So there was a point in time where a lot of women have started working and they cannot directly take care of their own children, among others, or try to fix the house. So getting domestic workers to help you out at the house became a popular option. And then, of course, especially in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the opportunities that opened for many women workers was the opportunity to go abroad and work as a domestic worker. This, despite the fact that a lot of them were actually graduates. They have degrees, many of them teachers from before, but since the opportunity to go abroad and work abroad became too popular, or it became a great option for many of them despite the risks involved in terms of their own safety, a lot of workers opted to go abroad and work as domestic workers.
Until 2013, when the Domestic Workers Act was approved, being a domestic worker in the Philippines was synonym to poverty and social exclusion. So what was the triggering factor that made trade unions, employee organizations, and the government decide to sit around the table and improve the situation of these workers?
Well, for one, we do have a lot of domestic workers working abroad. Migrant domestic workers contributed a lot to our economy, but at the same time, they experience a lot of harassment, a lot of violence, a lot of abuses abroad. So what we thought of was, if we want to advocate for the respect of the rights of our migrant domestic workers abroad, we won't be able to do that if we don't treat them as workers in our own country. So that's one of the initial rallying calls we had, was that domestic workers are workers and that domestic workers are entitled to decent work. So unless we practice what we preach, we cannot we cannot convince other countries to treat our migrant domestic workers well if we do not treat them well in our own backyard.
You can hear an extended version of the interview with Mr. Canglet on the Radio Labour website. And that's it. International labor news you can use. You can find more labor news on our website at www.radiolabor.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Labour. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. A new study finds that an overwhelming majority of Americans say they believe Muslim Americans positively contribute to society, but drill down in large numbers harbor suspicions over ties to terrorism and report feeling concerned when encountering Muslims in everyday life. Dr. Robert McKenzie is a senior fellow at New America, which sponsored the latest report.
Half of the general public is concerned about extremism spreading within Muslim communities in the United States. 1 in 3 Americans reported that they feel uncomfortable when they see Muslim Americans wearing a veil or Islamic attire. And 1 in 3 Americans also said that they would be concerned if a mosque or Islamic center was built in their neighborhood.
McKenzie said New America conducted its survey close to the midterms because they suspected that in local, state, and federal elections, Muslims would figure prominently and often in a negative way. And there has been no shortage of those negative portrayals. President Trump himself even warned recently that Middle Easterners had infiltrated a migrant caravan in Mexico, though he later admitted he had no intelligence to prove it. One sign those warnings are still striking a chord is that survey respondents said Muslims represent 17% of the U.S. population, far higher than the actual 1.1%. With more than 100 Muslim Americans running for office this November, McKenzie hopes those campaigns introduce Muslims to new segments of the American population. That could change minds in the long run, but for now, anti-Muslim sentiment continues to run deep.
Frankly, I think part of this has to do with muscle memory from 9/11. Even though we're approaching the 20-year mark, you still have Americans who have deep fear and deep concerns. You've also had a number of elected officials and people running for office who have done an awful lot to fan the flames.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We put it all together. Nothing goes to waste. Absolutely nothing goes to waste. Repurpose is our purpose. Okay. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 44 degrees Fahrenheit. And the Weather Underground says it even feels like 44 degrees Fahrenheit. We will be a bit cooler than yesterday. We're looking to get a high topping out about 56, 57 degrees. Winds are currently out of the southwest, light and variable. And cloudy conditions look like they will pretty much prevail most of the day. And only a small chance of rain later on tonight, and that may just be heavy mist. Some people around the other parts of the country would call that drizzle. But what we call drizzle, a lot of people call rain. So it'll be heavy mist to us. And that should continue through tomorrow, though we will be having a high in the low 60s, though the nights will now be in the mid to upper 30s. So there's that. Ragweed pollen is the dominant pollen causing people problems, and it is rated low at the moment. The air quality index has come down just a tad to 31 parts per million in the good range, and our fall daytime UV index of 2 is also in the low range. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.15 inches. Visibility is around 7 miles. That overcast is at the 200-foot level, and relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 58 degrees and sunny. Paris is 63 and sunny. Rome is 62 with rain with a weather advisory. Let's click on that right now and find out what it is. Oh, and it is active right now as we speak. They have heavy rain and disruption due to thunderstorms. And when they mean disruptions, not just the electrical grid, but they may have some flash flooding in lower lying areas. So take care if you're in Rome right now. All right. Kiev is 46 and cloudy. Kabul is 46 and fair. Hong Kong, 71 degrees and cloudy. Tokyo is 65 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 72 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and sunny. And New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit with rain and a weather advisory for a small craft advisory of heavy winds. And indeed, and you have a lot of rain. You will be cooler today than yesterday, New York. But then every day is a cool day when you're a New Yorker. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Brings us this first offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. Well, armed militias and other vigilantes are heeding Trump's call and heading to the border to confront migrants and put our troops in danger. I don't know. I would not mind. I'll say it again. I would not mind seeing our military maybe, arrest these people. Can they? I don't know. Gun-toting far-right militia members and other vigilantes are interpreting Trump's apocalyptic fear-mongering about the so-called migrant caravan as a call to arms. And they're answering that call with potentially disastrous results. Members of multiple armed militia groups are headed to the U.S.-Mexico border, where they plan to converge with other patriot groups, set up patrols, and wait for the caravan of Central American refugees who are still more than a month away from reaching the border. These guys are going to run out of their Pabst Blue Ribbon. Do they even drink Pabst Blue Ribbon? No, they don't. That's even too cool of a beer for them. Hams. They'll be drinking hams. Even that's too cool for them. Several of these groups have put up calls on social media for members around the country to take up arms and travel to the border region. What could go wrong? Maybe some, I don't know, how about a 14-year-old guy, a kid, 14-year-old kid working his family farm there in the Texas border along the Rio Grande? What about him? And he's out there herding the sheep, and he's bringing in the sheep, and he gets killed by the militia groups because he's obviously one of those microscopic migrants that are invading our country. Because he looks like a microscopic migrant. Millions of microscopic migrants coming here to invade our country. That's Kurt Vonnegut, by the way. Okay, just so you know. Military and law enforcement officials are alarmed enough by the prospect of armed vigilantes gathering alongside thousands of U.S. troops at the border that they have issued warnings to Army commanders and local communities. According to planning documents and intelligence reports obtained by Newsweek, the military is concerned about the arrival of unregulated militia members self-deploying to the border in alleged support of Border Patrol agents already stationed along the border with Mexico. Let me repeat that. Unregulated militias. You mean like illegal militias, right? I just want to make sure we understand that correctly. Illegal militias. Preliminary intelligence assessments are preparing for encounters with a litany of groups from unregulated militias to transcontinental criminal organizations. They operate under the guise of citizen patrols. The report went on to warn of incidents of unregulated militias stealing National Guard equipment during deployments. Meanwhile, Custom and Border Patrol sent out an advisory last week telling landowners in Texas to expect possible armed civilians on their property. Well, I think in Texas, don't they shoot first and then ask questions later? Stand your ground. In some areas, they are already there. The Albuquerque Journal reported on Friday that militia members have started to show up in border towns in New Mexico. And these aren't just any armed civilians. The so-called Patriot Movement is an umbrella term used to describe a loosely connected web of radical right-wing groups characterized by armed militias, wild conspiracy theories, a hatred of the federal government and government regulation, an overarching love for guns, and occasionally a strong component of racism. That's according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. An estimated 689 anti-government patriot and militia groups are active in the U.S. today, but unarmed little 3-year-olds barefoot coming to America to get away from the cartels are much more of a danger. And they always will be. So help them God. Despite their penchant for violence and anti-government ideology, some of these groups have formed alliances with mainstream Republicans, like right here in Oregon, where the state Republican Party moved to have militias provide security at its events. Militia members who have gathered at the border have parroted Trump's campaign rants by describing the group of asylum-seeking migrants as a Trojan horse or a decoy hiding ISIS, MS-13, and cartel gang members. But based on no evidence whatsoever, Trump continues to claim that unknown Middle Easterners, very tough men, and large numbers of gang members and violent criminals are traveling among the women, children, and families. Now, he's sending our troops to go defend against a threat that he manufactured for political purposes. But in a twisted turn of events, it looks like our troops really will have dangerous people to contend with. The radical right-wing militia members who were inspired by Trump.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Gwendolyn Smith of the new Civil Rights Movement brings us this final offering here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Donald Trump, in a tweet designed to smear Indiana Senator Joe Donnelly over his re-election bid, seemed to reveal the truth about Russia-based influence campaign that got him into office. Now, Trump said in his tweet, rumor has it that Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana is paying for Facebook ads for a so-called opponent on the Libertarian ticket. Donnelly is trying to steal the election. Isn't that what Russia did? Ooh. While it's likely that Trump's last sentence was an attempt at glibness, it nevertheless reads like an admission that accounts of Russia influence campaigns on the election do have some merit, including efforts to split the vote for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton by pushing independent candidates Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein. It is true that ads in the Indiana race have included some backing Lucy Brenton, the Libertarian Party candidate in the race, that include the statement that they were authorized by Donnelly for Indiana. The ads question just how conservative Republican Republican candidate Mike Brown actually is. Well, Russia is accused of far more than simply influencing the election in such a manner, including the theft of materials from DNC servers. Yeah, remember that part? Taking stolen goods and utilizing it for profit and political gain. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for this day, but we'll be back here tomorrow, of course, for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesday. Stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will visit with you here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.